Joshua asked the question that many times we ask when we're facing a battle. God, are you on my side? Are you for me? Or are you on the enemy's side against me? And when things are going well, we don't ask that question. When things are going well, we say, yeah, the Lord blessed me. The Lord's doing great things. But when we're in a battle for our lives, dealing with something that seems invincible, that we would never be able to conquer, we wonder, is God punishing me? Is it because of something I did 20 years ago? Is it because of my disobedience? Is it because of this or that? Is God my adversary? In Isaiah 63, God said of Israel when they were going through their afflictions, said, in all their afflictions, I was not their adversary. I was not opposed to them. I was for them, not against them. When we're in a battle, we often ask that. But this wasn't Israel's battle. This was God's battle. While we're fighting a battle on a natural level, God is often waging war on a spiritual level. Let's look at two quick stories. There are many illustrations we could use. But in 2 Kings chapter 6, verse 14 to 17, Syria was at war with Israel at this time. And what Syria would do would lay an ambush for the king of Israel. But the prophet Elisha, God would reveal to the prophet Elisha what the king of Aram or Syria was planning. And Elisha would say to the king, don't go there today because there's Syrians have laid an ambush to capture you. So after a while, the king of Syria asked, who was this one of the people in my own army who was telling the king of Israel? Somebody said, no, it's Elisha, the prophet. So he brought an army surrounding the town of Dothan that Elisha was staying in. And we pick up the story, verse 14. The king of Aram sent horses and chariots and a strong force there. They went by night and surrounded the city. When the servant of the man of God got up and went out early the next morning, an army with horses and chariots had surrounded the city. He said, oh, my Lord, what are we going to do? There's thousands, maybe tens of thousands of horses and chariots surrounding the city. And he said, don't be afraid, for there are more with us than there are with them. And he looked around. There's Elisha, there's me. We got two. King of Syria's got like 60,000. And then Elisha said, Lord, open their eyes. And he opened his servant's eyes, and he looked and saw the hills full of horses and chariots of fire all around Elisha. And if God were to touch our eyes to see into the spiritual realm and dimension, we would often realize that much of what happens on this earthly level is affected by what happens in the spiritual level. One other example, 2 Samuel 5:22 to 24. We don't have to read it. I'll just tell you the story. Shortly after David became king and established his headquarters at Jerusalem, the Philistines came up against David. David inquired of the Lord, should I go out against them? And the Lord said, yeah, go out against them, and I'll give you the victory. And sure enough, he had a tremendous victory. he had a tremendous breakthrough. A year later, the Philistines showed up again. How many of you ever had what you thought was a victory and a breakthrough, and then a year later the problem comes back? Well, the Philistines came, and David inquired of the Lord, and this time God said, don't go up directly against them. Go around behind them by the grove of balsam trees. He said, and wait until you hear the sound of marching in the treetops, which, he said, then you will know that the Lord has gone out before you, and then act promptly, which is a picture of the spiritual army of God going out and winning the victory so that we would win the victory on an earthly level. Many times God has to win the victory for us on a spiritual level. Another example would be Daniel prayed and waited 3 weeks before he got an answer. An angel came, said, sorry it took so long. Most of us would have prayed 3 days and said, oh, I guess God's not going to answer our prayer. But the angel said, the prince of Persia, talking about spiritual principality, resisted me. So it took me 3 weeks to get through to get this answer to you. And there are many illustrations of the fact that the battles you face are often waged on both the natural and spiritual level. If we deal with spiritual strongholds only on a natural level, we may be able to manage it for a while, but we'll never really conquer it. So the third observation I want to point out, this is an important one. Victory begins with the realization that you're standing on holy ground. Joshua said to the commander of the forces of the Lord, said, what's your message for me? What do I need to hear from you? You want me to get my armies and position them in place? You want me to go up against Jericho? What do you want me to do? He said, I want you to take your sandals off because you're on holy ground. For the place you are standing is holy, and Joshua did so. We sing songs like Holy is the Lord all the time. But I don't think most of us understand what the Scripture means when it refers to God as holy. We usually, I used to think it meant God sort of, because he was disgusted with sin, kind of held me out over here. I was like, I'm too holy, don't come near me. Kind of a sanctimonious attitude towards sin, that God will get defiled by our sin if we get too close. But let me share with you, and God certainly is morally above and beyond any of us, and his moral attributes are included in holiness. But let me give you, and these are in your notes, definition of holy. First of all, to be holy basically simply means to be separated out from what is common and ordinary and set apart as special, either special in itself or dedicated for a special purpose. So I take something from the ordinary and the common, and I set it apart as special. Now, when we talk about the holiness of God, God is infinitely separate from and completely other than his creation. If we're four-dimensional creatures, God is like a 10th dimensional person. He's so separate from and completely other than his creation. So infinitely above anything that we can imagine. And the total perfection of his divine attributes set him apart as uniquely special. And as such is to be regarded with a humble, even fearful reverence and awe. And we need to realize victory begins with a humble, fearful reverence and awe of God that doesn't trivialize God or marginalize God or push him to the periphery of our life. We don't disregard God. We don't treat God lightly or the things of God lightly. That all is encompassed in God's holiness. Victory begins with a holy passion for the honor and the glory of God. If you belong to Christ, then you are holy ground. And anything unholy, unwholesome in our life that stands in disobedience to the will of God and defiance of the glory of God violates God's holiness. Now, there is obviously a moral and ethical element of that. But the basic understanding is that God is so awesome, so above and beyond anything that we can imagine, so separate from, and infinitely above, that it should be with a profound humility, a reverence and awe, and passion for the honor and glory of God. And God gave the land of Canaan to the Israelites and said, this is holy ground. So we don't tolerate Jerichos that stand in defiance against God and don't regard God with a holy reverence.